The wind in Kansas has a voice. If you listen long enough, it tells you everything you need to know about the coming weather, the shifting seasons, and the mood of the earth itself. For Jack Miller, the wind was usually the only conversation partner he could tolerate. At 5 a.m., the sky over the plains was a bruised purple, slowly bleeding into the pale orange of dawn. Jack stood on his porch, a mug of black coffee in his hand, steam rising and vanishing instantly into the cool morning air. He was a man carved from granite and weathered by storms, both the atmospheric kind and the internal kind. At 45, his hair was graying at the temples, and his eyes, a piercing shade of steel blue, scanned the horizon with a habit he couldn't break. In the SEAL teams, they called it situational awareness. Here, in the quiet solitude of rural Kansas, it was just called checking the property. But today, the scan stopped short. Jack lowered his mug, his gaze fixed on the dirt path leading from the main gravel road to his old red-timbered barn. The dew on the ground had been disturbed. He set the coffee down on the railing. He didn't run. Jack moved with a deliberate, fluid economy of motion. He walked down the porch steps, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. As he approached the disturbed patch of earth, he knelt. Before we continue with Jack's discovery, if you enjoy stories about courage, mystery, and the resilience of the human spirit, please take a brief second to subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring more of these narratives to life for you. Jack studied the ground. There were tracks. They were not the heavy indentations of work boots, nor the hoofprints of stray cattle. They were small, sneakers. One tread was worn smooth on the left heel. The stride length suggested someone tired, dragging their feet. A child, Jack whispered to the wind. His internal alarm system, dormant for years, hummed to life. He looked toward the barn. The massive sliding door was cracked open just enough for a small body to slip through. The silence of the farm, usually peaceful, suddenly felt heavy, pregnant with a hidden presence. Jack approached the barn, stepping to the side of the door rather than directly in front of it, muscle memory from clearing rooms in active war zones. He slid the door open. The rusty rollers screamed, a harsh sound that made the pigeons in the rafters scatter in a flurry of panic. Inside, the air smelled of dry hay, motor oil, and old timber. Shafts of morning light pierced through the gaps in the wood, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. "I know you're in here," Jack said. His voice was deep, resonant, but he kept the volume low. He didn't shout. He spoke with the calm authority of a man who didn't need to yell to be heard. Silence answered him. Jack moved deeper into the shadows, his eyes adjusting instantly. He scanned the stacks of hay bales stacked against the north wall. High up near the top, a shadow moved. It was a slight twitch, a flinch of fear. Jack stopped. He raised his hands, palms open, showing he held nothing. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "My name is Jack. This is my farm. You're trembling so hard the hay is shaking." Slowly, a head peeked out from behind a bale. Jack felt a jolt in his chest, a sensation he hadn't felt since his last deployment. It was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. Her face was smeared with dirt and grease, her hair a tangled nest of blonde knots. But it was her eyes that stopped Jack cold. They were wide, terrified, and ancient. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much, too soon. She wore a thin, oversized denim jacket that offered zero protection against the Kansas chill, and her sneakers were held together with duct tape. "Come on down," Jack said, softening his tone. "I've got warm food inside, and heat." The girl didn't move. She pressed herself tighter into the corner. Jack realized standard reassurances wouldn't work. This wasn't a lost child. This was a hunted one. He changed tactics. He sat down on a crate, lowering his height, making himself less imposing. He looked away from her, breaking the predatory stare, and pulled a granola bar from his vest pocket. He unwrapped it slowly, the crinkle of the foil the only sound in the barn. "Peanut butter and chocolate," Jack said conversationally, taking a small bite. "Not exactly a gourmet breakfast, but it keeps the engine running." He broke off a piece and placed it on a barrel midway between them. Then he stood up and walked back toward the barn door. "I'm going to leave the door open so you get some light," he said, not looking back. "I'll be on the porch. If you want the rest of the bar, you know where to find me." He walked out. his heart hammering a rhythm of warning. The tracks led to the barn, but there were no tracks leading away from a vehicle drop-off point on the main road. That meant she had walked a long way. Or she had been dropped off in the dark, explicitly to be hidden. Jack Miller had come to Kansas to bury his past, but as he looked at the rising sun, he realized the past had just found him, wrapped in a dirty denim jacket. Patience is a weapon. In the SEAL teams, Jack had learned that rushing into a situation was the fastest way to die. You had to wait, observe, and let the variables reveal themselves. He sat on his porch for 40 minutes. He didn't check his watch. He measured time by the movement of shadows across the yard. Finally, he heard the crunch of gravel. He didn't turn his head immediately. He let her approach. She stopped 10 feet away, clutching the wrapper of the granola bar he had left. It was empty. Jack looked at her. In the full light of day, she looked even more fragile. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes. "Thirsty?" Jack asked. She nodded. A tiny, jerky movement. "Come inside. I made toast." He left the front door open and walked into his kitchen. It was a bachelor's kitchen, sparse, clean, utilitarian. He poured a glass of milk and placed a plate of buttered toast on the table. He pulled out a chair, then retreated to the counter, leaning against it with his own coffee. The girl hesitated at the threshold. She looked at the floor, then the ceiling, scanning the room for exits. Jack noted the behavior. Hypervigilance. She was assessing the threat level of the environment. A 7-year-old shouldn't know how to do that. She slipped inside, moving like a ghost, and sat at the table. She ate voraciously, crumbs falling onto the table, but she never took her eyes off Jack. "Do you have a name?" Jack asked gently. She stopped chewing. She swallowed hard, then whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. "Lily. Lily." Jack repeated, "Okay, Lily. I'm Jack. Where are your parents?" The reaction was immediate. Lily dropped the toast. Her hands began to shake and she clamped her mouth shut. The fear didn't just return, it spiked. She looked at the window, then back at Jack, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. "Okay," Jack said, raising a hand. "No questions. Not right now. We'll just eat." He understood trauma. He knew that pushing her now would be like trying to force open a locked safe with a sledgehammer. You might get inside, but you'd destroy everything of value in the process. The morning passed in a strange, tense rhythm. Jack went about his chores, feeding the horses, checking the fence line. And Lily shadowed him. She stayed exactly 3 paces behind him, never closer, never further. She was mimicking his movements, using his large frame as a shield against the open space of the plains. It was around noon when the first sign of the outside world intruded. Jack was repairing a section of fence near the road when he heard the hum of an engine. On these country roads, everyone drove pickup trucks, Fords, Chevys, Rams. The sound approaching was different. It was the smooth, high-pitched whine of a finely tuned sedan. Jack straightened up, wiping sweat from his brow. Lily, sensing his tension, ducked behind a fence post, making herself small. A black sedan, sleek and dusted with road grime, slowed down as it passed the property. The windows were tinted dark, illegal in this state. It didn't stop, but it crawled by at walking pace. Jack couldn't see the driver, but he could feel the weight of eyes on him. He didn't wave. In the country, you always wave. Not waving was a statement. Jack stood his ground, staring directly at the vehicle, his posture shifting from farmer to warrior. Shoulders back, chin down, hands loose at his sides, but ready. The car accelerated and disappeared over the hill. Jack looked down at Lily. She was trembling again. "You know that car?" he asked. She didn't speak. She just reached out and grabbed the fabric of his jeans, her knuckles white. "Right," Jack muttered, his jaw tightening. "That answers that." He looked at the tire tracks the car had left in the soft shoulder of the road. He memorized the tread pattern. Then he looked at the vast, defenseless expanse of his farm. For the first time in 5 years, Jack Miller felt the familiar, cold clarity of a mission profile forming in his mind. The objective had changed. It was no longer about fixing fences or baling hay. The objective was now asset protection, and the asset was holding onto his leg. Jack knew he had to navigate this carefully. The law required him to report a found child. If he didn't, he was kidnapping. If he did, he might be handing her back to the very people who terrified her. He decided on a reconnaissance run. "Lily," he said, kneeling down to her eye level, "I have to go into town to get supplies. I want you to stay here. I'm going to lock the doors. You don't open them for anyone but me. Can you do that?" Panic flared in her eyes. She shook her head violently. "I can't take you with me yet," Jack said firmly. "If the wrong people see you, I can't protect you. Here, inside the house, you have the advantage. You know where the hiding spots are." He spent the next 20 minutes teaching her how to engage the deadbolts and showing her a safe space he had built years ago, a small hidden compartment behind the pantry shelves, originally designed for tornado emergencies. "If you hear a car that isn't my truck, you get in here and you stay quiet. Even if they call your name, you understand?" Lily nodded. She looked terrified, but she also looked determined. She climbed into the space to test it. Jack closed the false panel. It was invisible. He drove his battered Ford F-150 into the town of Carapo Creek. It was a town of 3,000 people, where the grain elevator was the tallest building, and secrets were harder to keep than water in a sieve. He parked in front of the hardware store, but walked 2 doors down to the sheriff's station. Sheriff Jim Brody was a good man, a family man who had known Jack since high school. But Brody was also a man who followed the rulebook, and the rulebook didn't have a chapter for mysterious mute girls hiding in barns. Jack walked in. The station smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. Brody was at his desk, wrestling with a computer that looked like it belonged in a museum. "Jack," Brody said, looking up with a genuine smile. "Don't see you in town much. Finally run out of excuses to avoid society?" "Something like that," Jack said, leaning against the counter. He kept his body language casual, relaxed. "Run out of nails. Figured I'd stop by." They exchanged small talk about the weather and the upcoming county fair. Then Jack threw out the bait. "Say, Jim, I saw a black sedan crawling past my place earlier. Tinted windows. Didn't look local. We have any VIPs visiting the county?" Brody frowned, leaning back in his chair. "Black sedan? No. We had a couple of real estate developers sniffing around the Henderson place last week, but they were in SUVs. Why? They give you trouble?" "Just checking," Jack said. "People get lost out there. Wanted to make sure I shouldn't be looking out for trouble." He paused, then added the crucial question, burying it in nonchalance. "Things been quiet otherwise? No Amber Alerts or runaways from the city?" Brody shook his head. "Quiet as a tomb, Jack. Boring, actually. The radio hasn't chirped in 3 days except for a loose cow on Route 9. Jack felt a chill. If a 7-year-old girl was missing, someone should be looking for her. If no one was looking, it meant one of 2 things. Either no one cared, or the people who lost her didn't want the police involved. "Good to hear," Jack said, pushing off the counter. "Keep it boring, Jim." "Will do. You take care, Jack." As Jack walked back to his truck, the educational training of his past kicked in. Intelligence gathering is about what isn't said as much as what is. The absence of a missing person report was the loudest signal he could have received. Lily wasn't just lost, she was being erased. He stopped at the hardware store. Instead of nails, he bought 4 high-definition trail cameras, a box of motion sensor floodlights, and a new set of heavy-duty padlocks. The clerk, a teenager named Mike, raised an eyebrow. "Expecting a bear invasion, Mr. Miller?" "Coyotes," Jack lied smoothly. "Getting bold this year." He drove back to the farm with his eyes glued to the rearview mirror. He took a circuitous route, doubling back twice to ensure he wasn't being followed. The roads were empty. When he finally pulled up to the farmhouse, his heart dropped. The front door was still locked, just as he had left it, but on the porch steps, sitting right in the center of the welcome mat, was a single object. It was a doll, an old porcelain doll with one eye missing. Jack hadn't put it there, and Lily had been locked inside. Someone had been here while he was gone. They hadn't tried to break in. They had left a message. Jack unlocked the door and rushed to the pantry. "Lily!" The silence stretched for a terrifying second before the false panel clicked and slid open. Lily tumbled out, tears streaming down her face. silently gasping for air. Jack caught her, pulling her into a hug. He felt her tiny heart hammering against his chest like a trapped bird. "I've got you," Jack whispered, his voice turning into a growl. "I've got you." He looked over her shoulder at the closed front door. The doll was still on the porch. The game had begun, and the enemy was closer than he thought. He realized then that the isolation of the farm, his greatest comfort, was now his greatest tactical weakness. He was alone out here, and they knew it. The doll sat on the kitchen table, an inanimate intruder in their sanctuary. Jack had brought it inside using a pair of heavy leather work gloves, careful not to contaminate any potential evidence, though his gut told him the professionals he was dealing with wouldn't leave fingerprints. He examined it under the harsh light of the range hood. It was cheap, the kind you'd win at a carnival, but the porcelain face had been deliberately cracked. It wasn't just a threat. It was psychological warfare. They wanted him to know they could get close. They wanted him to feel unsafe in his own home. "Lily," Jack said, his voice steady. He didn't look at her, focusing on the doll so she wouldn't feel scrutinized. "I need you to take off that denim jacket." Lily, currently wrapped in a thick wool blanket on the sofa, froze. The jacket was her armor. It was the only thing she had brought from the world she escaped. "I'm not taking it away," Jack promised, turning to face her, "but I need to check it. If they found us this quickly, there's a reason." She hesitated, her small fingers clutching the rough fabric. Then, slowly, she slid her arms out and handed it to him. Jack took the jacket to the counter. He didn't just look at it, he dissected it with his eyes and hands. He ran his fingers along the seams, feeling for inconsistencies in the fabric density. He checked the buttons, the collar, the cuffs. Nothing. He frowned. He moved to her sneakers. He checked the soles, the tongues. Nothing. "Am I paranoid?" he thought. Maybe they just followed tracks. But the car had driven by before he went to town. They knew she was here before visual confirmation. He went back to the jacket. He turned it inside out. He ran his thumb along the bottom hem. There, buried deep in the stitching, was a tiny, hard lump no bigger than a grain of rice. Jack grabbed a paring knife and carefully unpicked the stitch. A small black cylinder fell onto the counter with a quiet tink. A passive RFID tracker. High-end military grade. It didn't emit a constant signal. That would drain the battery. But it pinged whenever it passed a reader or received a specific wake-up frequency. Jack's blood ran cold. The black sedan. It hadn't just been driving by. It had been pinging the house, confirming the signal strength. They knew exactly where she was. They weren't attacking yet because they were waiting for something. Or someone. He looked at Lily. She was watching the black chip with terror. "It's okay," Jack said, crushing the device under the heel of his boot until it was nothing but dust and plastic shards. "It's gone. They can't see us anymore." But Jack knew that wasn't entirely true. The signal had stopped, which meant the enemy would know the device had been discovered. The clock had just accelerated. The silent phase was over. "We have work to do," Jack announced. For the next 4 hours, Jack Miller transformed the farmhouse. He didn't have a team and he didn't have high-tech weaponry, but he had the terrain. He explained his actions to Lily as he worked, partly to keep her calm, and partly because treating her like a partner rather than a victim seemed to help her focus. "We create layers of defense," Jack said, drilling a bracket into the doorframe to hold a heavy wooden crossbar. "The first layer is detection. The second is delay. The third is denial." He went outside, moving with purpose. He installed the motion sensor floodlights he'd bought, positioning them not just to light up the yard, but to blind anyone approaching the house. He placed them at irregular intervals so there were no easy shadows to hide in. He took the trail cameras and mounted them low on the fence posts, pointing back toward the house, not away from it. "Why point them at the house?" Jack muttered to himself, imagining a trainee asking the question. "Because I know who's coming in. I need to know what they do when they get here." He filled empty glass bottles with gravel and strung them on a fishing line across the perimeter of the porch steps. A primitive tripwire alarm. If someone stepped through in the dark, the clatter would wake the dead. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of crimson, The farmhouse was no longer just a home. It was a hard target. Jack came back inside, locking the heavy new deadbolts. He looked at Lily. She had been watching him through the window the whole time. "Hungry?" he asked. She nodded. "Me too. Let's see what we can make that doesn't come out of a wrapper." The wind outside picked up, howling against the siding, but inside, the air was still. The tension hadn't left, but it had changed. It was the focused, sharp tension of a wire pulled tight, ready to snap. Dinner was simple: grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. Comfort food. Jack placed the bowl in front of Lily and sat across from her. The kitchen was dark, lit only by a single lantern Jack had placed on the floor, a tactic to keep their silhouettes away from the windows. "You need to communicate with me, Lily," Jack said softly. "I can't fight a ghost. I need to know who is chasing you." Lily dipped her spoon into the soup, her hand trembling slightly. She didn't look up. Jack pushed a notepad and a pen across the table. "You don't have to speak. I know sometimes the words get stuck. Just show me." Lily stared at the blank paper. For a long time, the only sound was the wind and the creaking of the old house. Then, she picked up the pen. She didn't write. She drew. Her strokes were frantic, heavy, tearing the paper in places. Jack watched upside down as the image formed. It wasn't a person. It was a building. A tall, gray building with bars on the windows. Not a prison, but something clinical. She drew a fence around it. Then she drew a symbol on the front of the building. It looked like a serpent wrapped around a sword, but stylized, sharp. Jack leaned in. "Is this where you were?" Lily nodded. She added stick figures, lots of them, small ones, other children. Then she drew a large figure standing over them. She pressed hard on the pen, blacking out the face until the paper ripped. "Who is that?" Jack asked. Lily dropped the pen as if it burned her. She wrapped her arms around herself and rocked back and forth. Jack picked up the drawing. The symbol. He had seen it before, not in the military, but in the private sector, the world of private military contractors, PMCs, and off-the-books research firms. It was the logo of Aegis Dynamics. A cold knot formed in Jack's stomach. Aegis wasn't just a security firm. They were a massive conglomerate involved in everything from bioweapons defense to advanced personnel training. Rumors about them had circulated in the SEAL teams for years. Stories about illegal black sites and human experimentation that were dismissed as conspiracy theories. If Lily had escaped from an Aegis facility, she wasn't just a runaway. She was intellectual property, stolen cargo, and they would burn the entire state of Kansas to the ground to get her back. "Lily," Jack said, his voice low and intense. "Did they do tests on you?" She looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. She pulled up the sleeve of her oversized shirt. On the inside of her forearm, the skin was bruised and punctuated by a series of needle marks. But what caught Jack's eye was the tattoo. It wasn't ink, it was a barcode, branded directly into the skin. Subject 7L. Jack felt a surge of rage so pure it almost blinded him. He had seen evil in war. He had seen what men do to each other for land, for religion, for money. But hurting a child, branding her like cattle, that was a different species of sin. He reached out and gently pulled her sleeve back down. "Nobody touches you again," Jack swore. "Not while I'm breathing." Suddenly the fishing line alarm on the porch clattered. Glass bottles smashing against wood. Jack was moving before the sound finished. He killed the lantern light instantly, plunging the kitchen into darkness. "Safe room. Now," he whispered. Lily didn't argue. She scrambled off the chair and vanished into the pantry. Jack heard the click of the false panel. He moved to the window, peering through the slit in the curtains. The motion sensor lights he had installed, they hadn't triggered. Smart, Jack thought. They cut the power. He was in his element now. The fear was gone, replaced by the cold, mathematical precision of combat. He reached under the sink and pulled out his shotgun, a Mossberg 590. He didn't rack the slide yet. The sound would give away his position. He moved silently through the living room, his footsteps masked by the howling wind. He listened. The front door handle jiggled, gently, testing the lock. Then, silence. They were probing. testing the defenses. Jack crept to the side door, the one that led to the mudroom. He waited. A shadow moved across the window. Jack didn't wait for them to breach. In a siege, passivity is death. He needed to change the dynamic. He needed to be the hunter. He unlocked the side door quietly, counted to 3, and kicked it open. The wind exploded into the room, carrying rain and dead leaves. Jack stepped out onto the mudroom landing, weapon raised, scanning the darkness. "Don't move," he barked. To his left, a figure dived behind the woodpile. Jack tracked the movement, aiming center mass at the logs. "I said don't move. Hands where I can see them." "Easy, Jack. It's me." The voice was familiar. Too familiar. Slowly the figure stood up, hands raised high. The moonlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the uniform. A beige Stetson hat. A badge. It was Sheriff Brody. Jack didn't lower the shotgun. "You're trespassing, Jim, and you cut my lights." "I didn't cut anything," Brody said, his voice tight with nerves. "The storm probably took out a transformer down the road. The whole grid is flickering. Put the gun down, Jack." Jack kept the barrel leveled. "Why are you sneaking around my porch at night, Jim? Why didn't you use the driveway?" Brody took a step forward. "I tried calling. Phone lines are down too. I came to check on you. That black sedan you asked about? I ran the plates you didn't give me." Jack narrowed his eyes. "I didn't give you plates. I pulled security footage from the gas station at the edge of town," Brody said. "Saw the car pass by. Federal plates, Jack, but flagged. Do not detain. That usually means CIA or something deeper. I came to tell you to be careful." Jack studied his old friend's face. Brody looked sincere. He looked scared. But something was off. Brody was sweating, and it was a cold night. "Who's with you?" Jack asked. "Nobody. Just me." "Then why is your hand hovering near your radio?" Brody froze. "Jack, listen to me. There are people asking questions in town. They showed a photo of a girl." Jack's finger tightened on the trigger. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them nothing," Brody pleaded. "I swear. But they're coming out here, Jack. They have a warrant, or something that looks like one. They'll be here in 10 minutes. I took the back roads to beat them." Jack lowered the shotgun slightly, but he didn't safe it. "Why help me?" "Because you're a pain in the ass, Miller, but you're a good man. And those guys, they looked like sharks in suits. Whatever you've got going on, you need to get out. Now." Jack made a decision. He stepped back. "Come inside." Brody hurried into the kitchen. Jack locked the door behind him. "She's here, isn't she?" Brody asked, looking around the dark room. "Does it matter?" Jack asked. "It matters if I'm aiding and abetting a fugitive." "She's 7 years old, Jim. She's not a fugitive. She's a victim." Jack grabbed a map from the counter and spread it out. "If they're 10 minutes out, I can't take the main road. Where are they coming from?" "North, Route 4. Then I go south, through the creek bed." "The creek is flooded, Jack. You'll get stuck." "My truck won't. It's modified." Jack looked at the pantry. "Lily, come out." The panel slid open. Lily emerged, her eyes wide, staring at the sheriff's uniform with pure panic. She backed away. "It's okay," Jack said. "He's a friend. He's helping us leave." Brody looked at the girl, the bruises, the terror, the dirt. His expression softened from lawman to father. "Jesus, Jack. Who did this to her?" "A company called Aegis Dynamics," Jack said. "Ever heard of them?" Brody went pale. "The government contractors?" "Jack, you're kicking a hornet's nest the size of the Pentagon." "I know. Grab that water jug. We're leaving." As they moved toward the back door, a dazzling white light flooded the kitchen windows. It was blinding, accompanied by the thrum of a heavy diesel engine. Brody cursed. "They're early." A voice amplified by a loudspeaker boomed from the darkness outside. "Jack Miller, this is private security operating under federal authority. We have the perimeter secured. Send out the child and no charges will be filed. You have 2 minutes." Jack looked at Brody. "You said 10 minutes." I thought it was 10. Brody stammered. Jack looked at the front window, then the back. Lights everywhere. They were surrounded. "They boxed us in," Jack said calmly. He looked at Lily. She wasn't crying anymore. She was holding the drawing of the building, clutching it like a weapon. Jack knelt down. Remember the game plan? The deeper hiding spot? Lily shook her head. She grabbed Jack's hand and pulled. She pointed to the floor, to the rug in the living room. Jack frowned. The storm cellar? There's no exit, Lily. It's a dead end. She shook her head again, more insistently. She mimed digging. Jack looked at Brody. Watch the windows. He ran to the living room and threw back the heavy rug. Underneath was the trapdoor to the old root cellar, unused for decades. He pulled it open. The smell of damp earth wafted up. Lily pointed down, then looked at Jack with an intensity that pierced him. She knew something. Jack shined his flashlight down. The cellar was empty, just dirt walls and rotting shelves. But in the far corner, the dirt had collapsed recently, revealing a dark hole. An old tunnel. Jack remembered then. This farm used to be part of the Underground Railroad in the 1850s. His grandfather had told him stories of tunnels that led to the river, tunnels used to smuggle escaped slaves to freedom. He thought they were myths. Lily, with her small size and curiosity, must have found it while exploring the barn or the foundations earlier. "You're a genius," Jack whispered. He turned to Brody. "Jim, I need you to do something that might cost you your badge." Brody looked at the lights outside, then at the scared little girl. He pulled his service pistol and checked the chamber. "Badge is just metal, Jack. What do you need?" "Stay here. Negotiate. Buy me time. Tell them I'm armed and unstable. Make them hesitate to breach. Give me 5 minutes. And if they breach anyway, then tell my story," Jack said. He picked up Lily. She wrapped her legs around his waist, burying her face in his neck. "Hold tight," Jack whispered. He lowered himself into the darkness of the earth, pulling the trapdoor shut above them just as the first canister of tear gas shattered the kitchen window. The world above disappeared, replaced by the crushing weight of silence and the smell of century-old damp earth. The tunnel was tight. For a man of Jack's size, broad-shouldered and 6'2", it was a suffocating gauntlet. He had to crawl on his elbows and knees, dragging his body through the darkness, with Lily clinging to his back like a small backpack. Boom! A dull thud vibrated through the soil. The breach. The team above had blown the door. Sheriff Brody was now in the thick of it, hopefully talking fast enough to save his own life. "Hold on, Lily," Jack grunted, the air in the tunnel thin and stale. He turned on his tactical light, keeping the beam low. The tunnel was shored up with rotting timber, remnants of a time when brave men and women moved human cargo through the dark to escape the horrors of slavery. Jack felt a profound sense of connection to history. He was walking the same path, for the same reason. Freedom. The tunnel sloped downward. Jack's training kicked in. Educational note. In confined space rescue, panic is the enemy. The brain, deprived of spatial reference, begins to hallucinate threats. The key is rhythmic breathing and focusing on the immediate 3 feet in front of you. "We're okay," Jack whispered, his voice echoing flatly. Just a little further. Suddenly, the tunnel widened into a small earthen chamber. Roots from the great oaks above dangled from the ceiling like skeletal fingers. Jack paused to check Lily. In the glow of the flashlight, her face was streaked with tears, but she wasn't making a sound. She pointed forward. Jack looked. The tunnel branched. One way was collapsed, a wall of mud and stone. The other way led toward the sound of rushing water. The creek, Jack realized. It leads to the creek bank. They pushed forward. The air grew colder, fresher. The smell of stagnant earth gave way to the scent of wet limestone and running water. They emerged into the night through a hole concealed by a thick tangle of briars and exposed roots at the edge of the creek bed. Jack pulled himself out, mud-caked and gasping, then lifted Lily gently onto the mossy bank. They were out, but they were far from safe. Above them, on the ridge where the farmhouse stood, floodlights cut through the sky. Jack could hear shouting. The wind carried the distinct mechanical whine of a drone. "Get down," Jack hissed. He pulled Lily under the overhang of the creek bank. A moment later, a drone zipped overhead, its red navigation lights blinking. It wasn't a toy. It was a commercial-grade surveillance unit, likely equipped with thermal imaging. Jack looked at the freezing water of the creek. "Lily," he said, his tone serious, "I need to cover you in mud." The water is cold and the mud is dirty, but it will hide your heat from the robot in the sky. Do you trust me? She looked at the drone, then at Jack. She nodded. Jack worked quickly, plastering the cold clay from the riverbank over her jacket, her hat, and her exposed skin. He did the same to himself. It was an old technique, one he had used in the jungles of South America, to blend the human heat signature with the ambient temperature of the environment. They lay still in the shadows as the drone circled back, hovering directly over the creek. The camera lens swiveled, searching. It hovered for 10 agonizing seconds. Then, finding nothing but the cold signatures of mud and water, it buzzed away toward the tree line. Jack let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "Let's move," he whispered. "We need to get to higher ground." They moved for 3 miles through the dense cornfields that bordered his property. Cornfields at night are disorienting. The rows are endless, the leaves act like razor blades, and sound travels in strange ways. Jack carried Lily for most of it. She was exhausted, her adrenaline crash leaving her limp. He was heading for a specific location, an old hunting blind on the neighbor's property, elevated and hidden in a cluster of elm trees. It wasn't a fortress, but it was dry, and more importantly, it was off the grid. They reached the blind just as the first gray light of dawn began to touch the horizon. Jack hoisted Lily up the ladder and followed her into the small wooden box. He closed the hatch. They were safe for the moment. Jack pulled a survival blanket from his pocket, shiny mylar material, and wrapped it around Lily to trap her body heat. He broke open a chem light, cracking it to produce a soft green glow. "You did good, kid," Jack said, leaning back against the rough wood wall. "Real good." Lily looked at him. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the drawing she had made earlier, the building with the snake symbol. She tapped it, then pointed to herself. Jack frowned. "You want to tell me about the building?" She shook her head. She pointed to her head. Then she made a motion like she was typing. "Computers?" Jack guessed. "You worked with computers?" She shook her head frustratedly. She closed her eyes and began to hum. It wasn't a song. It was a rhythmic, monotone humming. Then she spoke. "Alpha, 9, Sierra, 4, dash, break, Tango, 7. Jack froze. "Lily?" She didn't open her eyes. She continued, her voice devoid of emotion, like a recording. "Project Weaver. Level 4 clearance. Asset liquidation protocols. Account number, Swiss 774, Bravo." Jack realized with a jolt of horror what she was. She wasn't just a test subject for drugs. She was a living hard drive. In the world of high-level espionage and black-budget projects, digital data is vulnerable. Servers can be hacked. Cloud storage can be breached. But a human brain? A child with eidetic memory? Conditioned to store alphanumeric strings? That was the ultimate offline storage. "They used you to hide their dirty laundry," Jack whispered. "You have the bank accounts, the operation names, everything." Lily opened her eyes. The trance broke. She looked small and scared again. They made me memorize the lists," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Every day. If I forgot, no food." Jack felt the rage return, colder and sharper than before. Aegis Dynamics wasn't just chasing a runaway. They were chasing their own indictment. If Lily spoke to the right people, she could bring down the entire corporation. "Who else knows you can do this?" Jack asked. "The doctor," she said, "and the man in the suit." Jack nodded. "Okay, we're done running." He reached into his boot and pulled out a backup burner phone he kept waterproofed in plastic. He hadn't turned it on in 2 years. He powered it up. The battery was at 12%, just enough. He didn't call the police. He didn't call the FBI. He dialed a number he had memorized 10 years ago, a number that belonged to a woman named Sarah Jenkins, an investigative journalist for the Washington Post who had once exposed a botched SEAL operation and saved Jack's team from being scapegoated. It rang 3 times. "This line is for emergencies only." A woman's voice answered, sharp and alert. "Sarah," Jack said, "this is Miller. I have a story, but I need an extraction, and I need it yesterday." There was a pause. "Jack Miller? You're supposed to be raising cows in Kansas." "I found something in the corn, Sarah. Or rather, she found me. I have an Aegis Dynamics Level 4 asset, human, 7 years old. The silence on the other end was heavy. "Send me your coordinates," Sarah said, her voice shifting to professional steel. "I can have a chopper there in 2 hours, but Jack, if you're lying, or if Aegis intercepts you, we're both dead." "Just bring the chopper," Jack said, "and bring a lawyer." He hung up and removed the battery. He looked at Lily. "Help is coming, but we have to survive the sunrise." The sun rose over Kansas, turning the golden corn into a sea of fire. But with the light came danger. Jack scanned the perimeter from the hunting blind. Through his binoculars, he saw them. 3 black SUVs were moving down the dirt road that bordered the cornfield. Men in tactical gear were dismounting, moving into the stalks. They had dogs. "They're tracking our scent," Jack muttered. The mud in the creek had hidden them from thermal, but dogs were a different game. He looked at the layout. The hunting blind was in a cluster of trees, an island in the corn. If the dogs picked up the trail where they exited the creek, they would lead the team straight here in 20 minutes. The extraction was 2 hours away. The math didn't work. Jack looked at Lily. "I need you to be brave one more time." He took off his heavy canvas jacket and handed it to her. "Put this on over your head. It smells like me. Hide in the corner, under the bench. Do not move. Do not make a sound." "Where are you going?" she whispered. "I'm going to lead the dogs away," Jack said. "I'm going to make a lot of noise." He checked his shotgun. 5 shells. He had his knife, and he had the terrain. "Jack," he paused at the ladder. "Don't die," she said. "I'm a SEAL, Lily," he said with a grim smile. "We don't die. We just regroup in hell." Jack slid down the ladder and sprinted into the corn, moving away from the blind, heading perpendicular to the wind. He wanted the dogs to catch his scent. He wanted them to follow him. He ran for 500 yards, his boots pounding the dirt, leaves slashing at his face. Then he stopped. He found a spot where the irrigation ditch intersected the field. He waited. 10 minutes later, he heard the barking. Closer now. "Contact front," a voice shouted in the distance. Jack pumped the shotgun. Click, clack. The sound was unmistakable. He fired a shot into the air. The boom rolled across the plains like thunder. "Over here," Jack roared. "Come and get it." He saw the corn stalks moving. The team was shifting, turning toward him. Away from the blind, away from Lily. Jack Miller wasn't fighting for a flag anymore. He wasn't fighting for a government. He was fighting for the one thing that actually mattered: innocence. He dropped into the irrigation ditch, vanishing into the mud just as the first bullets shredded the corn stalks where he had been standing. The hunt was on, and Jack Miller was the bait. The cornfield was no longer a farm. It was a grid of green walls and suffocating heat. Jack lay pressed into the mud of the irrigation ditch, his breathing controlled, shallow, and silent. Above him, the corn stalks rustled. Not from the wind, but from the passage of heavy boots. Educational insight. In asymmetric warfare, when you are outnumbered and outgunned, you do not seek to win the battle of attrition. You seek to break the enemy's loop of observation and orientation. You become a ghost. Jack smeared more mud over his face. He could hear the panting of a tracking dog, a Belgian Malinois, straining against its lead just 20 yards away. Lost the scent. A voice crackled over a radio. He went into the water. "The dog is confused." "Sweep the sector," another voice commanded, cold and professional. "He's wounded. He can't go far. Remember, the priority is the girl, but Miller is a loose end we need to tie up." Jack checked his shotgun. 3 shells left. He had used 2 to create a diversion earlier, blasting a scarecrow to draw their fire. He didn't want to kill these men. They were contractors, likely ex-military themselves, fighting for a paycheck they probably didn't understand the full scope of, but they were hunting a child. That revoked their pass. Jack moved. He didn't stand up. He slithered along the ditch, moving parallel to their line. He needed to flank them. If he could take out the handler, the dog would be neutralized as a tracking asset. He reached a junction in the ditch where a rusty iron sluice gate blocked the water. He climbed up the muddy bank, keeping low. A mercenary was standing 10 feet away, his back to Jack, scanning the horizon with thermal binoculars. Jack surged forward. He didn't use the gun. He holstered it and tackled the man at the waist, driving him into the dirt. It wasn't a graceful movie fight. It was ugly, desperate, and fast. Jack used a chokehold, cutting off the blood flow to the brain. The man thrashed for 6 seconds, then went limp. Jack took the man's radio and earpiece. He didn't speak. He just listened. "Team 2, report," the radio chirped. Jack clicked the transmit button twice, a universal signal for message received or silence. "Team 2." Jack slipped back into the corn. Now he had their comms. He knew their movements. He took out Collins. The commander's voice came through, tight with anger. "Converge on Sector 4, box him in." Jack smiled grimly. Sector 4 was exactly where he wasn't. He had left the unconscious man there as a decoy. While they collapsed on his previous position, Jack was doubling back toward the road. He checked his watch. 1 hour and 10 minutes since the call to Sarah, 50 minutes to go. He had to keep them dancing. But then, the dynamic shifted. "Sir," a voice said on the radio, "we found something. A hunting blind in the tree line. East sector." Jack's heart stopped. They had ignored his diversion. Or maybe they had enough men to split up. "Check it," the commander ordered. Jack didn't think. He didn't plan. He broke cover. He stood up in the corn and sprinted. Stealth was over. He had to draw them back. He raised the shotgun and fired a round into the sky. "Hey!" he roared, his voice tearing through the humid air. "I'm right here. You want the prize? Come and take it." He racked the slide. Click-clack. He ran perpendicular to the blind, making as much noise as possible, crashing through the stalks. "Contact. He's running west." "Ignore him." The commander's voice came over the earpiece, chilling Jack to the bone. "Secure the blind first. The asset is the priority." Jack froze. They weren't taking the bait. They were professionals. They knew he was the distraction. Jack turned and ran toward the tree line. He was 300 yards away. The mercenaries were closer. He was exhausted, his legs burning with lactic acid, his lungs screaming. He burst out of the corn just as 2 black-clad figures approached the base of the ladder leading to the hunting blind. "Step away," Jack screamed, raising his weapon. They turned, raising their rifles. Jack fired. The buckshot hit the dirt in front of them, a warning. He was out of range for a kill shot, and he knew it. He just needed them to duck. They returned fire. Bullets zipped past Jack, snapping twigs and thudding into the trees. Jack dove behind an old oak trunk. "We have the target pinned," the mercenary yelled. "Breaching the blind now." Jack scrambled to reload, his fingers fumbling with the shells. He was too late. He heard the boot on the ladder. "No!" Jack shouted, preparing to charge into the open, fully expecting to die. Then the sky tore open. It wasn't the rhythmic thup-thup-thup of a transport helicopter. It was a roar. A low-flying news helicopter, painted in the bright blue and white colors of Channel 4 News, banked sharply over the tree line. But it wasn't alone. Flanking it was a massive dark gray S-76 helicopter with no markings. The wind formed the rotors, flattened the corn. The mercenaries on the ladder looked up, blinded by the sudden wash of air and dust. A voice, amplified by a loudspeaker system that shook the ground, boomed from the gray helicopter. "This is Federal Agent Sarah Jenkins. You are surrounded by federal marshals. Drop your weapons immediately. This operation is being broadcast live to a national audience." Jack slumped against the tree, the shotgun slipping from his hand. Sarah. She hadn't just brought a lawyer. She had brought the cavalry, and she had brought the one thing private military contractors fear more than bullets: publicity. The camera on the news chopper swiveled, its lens focused directly on the mercenaries. The men froze. If they shot Jack, it was murder on live TV. If they breached the blind, it was kidnapping recorded in 4K resolution. The commander's voice crackled in Jack's ear, panic finally seeping in. "Abort. Abort immediately. Scrub the mission. We are burned." The mercenaries lowered their rifles. They backed away from the ladder, hands raised, retreating toward the corn. The gray helicopter flared and touched down in the clearing between the corn and the trees. Dust swirled, blinding and chaotic. The side door slid open. 6 heavily armed figures in FBI windbreakers poured out, weapons trained on the retreating mercenaries. And behind them, a woman in a trench coat, holding a microphone like a weapon. Sarah Jenkins. She spotted Jack and ran toward him, ducking under the rotors. "Jack!" she yelled over the engine noise. Jack ignored her. He pushed himself off the tree and stumbled toward the hunting blind. "Lily," he called out. "It's safe. Come out." There was no movement. Jack felt a spike of terror. Had a stray bullet hit the wood? Had the stress been too much? He climbed the ladder, his limbs shaking. He threw open the hatch. Lily was curled in the corner, covered in the mylar blanket. She was clutching the drawing of the building. Her eyes were squeezed shut, her hands over her ears. "Lily," Jack whispered, reaching out. She opened her eyes. She saw the mud on his face, the exhaustion in his eyes. "Is the bad man gone?" she whispered. "Yeah," Jack said, his voice cracking. "All the bad men are gone. Look." He picked her up and carried her to the opening. Below, the FBI agents were cuffing the mercenaries. The news chopper was circling. But in the center of the clearing, Sarah Jenkins stood looking up at them. She didn't look like a reporter hunting a scoop. She looked like a human being witnessing a miracle. Jack climbed down, holding Lily tight. When his boots hit the grass, his legs finally gave out. He dropped to one knee. Lily didn't let go. She wrapped her small arms around his neck and buried her face in his muddy shirt. "I got you," Jack whispered into her hair. Mission accomplished. 6 months later, the snow fell softly on the Kansas plains, turning the world into a blank sheet of white paper. The farmhouse looked different. The peeling paint was gone, replaced by a fresh coat of slate blue. The porch railing was fixed. There were new fences. But the biggest change was the noise. Inside the kitchen, there was music playing. Not the silence of a hermit, but the sound of life. Jack stood at the stove, flipping pancakes. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans. He looked younger. The tension that had lived in his shoulders for 5 years was gone. 2 chocolate chip, 1 blueberry, a voice ordered from the table. Lily sat there. Her hair was clean, brushed and tied back with a ribbon. The dark circles under her eyes were gone, replaced by the rosy cheeks of a healthy child. She was drawing, but not blueprints or prison cells. She was drawing a horse. "Coming right up, Commander," Jack said, sliding the plate onto the table. The legal battle had been messy. Aegis Dynamics was currently being dismantled by a congressional hearing, fueled by the testimony provided by the data Lily had unlocked, and the relentless reporting of Sarah Jenkins. The man in the suit was awaiting trial. Lily had no living relatives. The system wanted to put her in foster care. Jack Miller, a single man with a history of PTSD and a remote farm, was not the ideal candidate on paper. But Sarah Jenkins had testified. Sheriff Brody had testified, and in a closed chamber meeting with the judge, Lily had spoken. She said 4 words that closed the case. "He is my safe." Jack sat down across from her with his coffee. "Bus comes in 10 minutes, Jack said. "I know," Lily said, cutting her pancake. "I'm ready. I memorized the spelling words." "I bet you did," Jack smiled. "You memorize everything." "Not everything," Lily said. She looked up at him, her eyes bright and intelligent. "I forgot what it was like to be scared." Jack felt a lump in his throat. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Good," he said. "Keep forgetting." He walked her to the end of the driveway. The yellow school bus rumbled over the hill, a stark contrast to the black sedans of the past. Jack watched her climb the steps. She stopped at the top, turned, and waved. It wasn't a frantic wave. It was casual, happy. Jack waved back. As the bus drove away, disappearing into the white horizon, Jack Miller stood alone on the road. But for the first time in his life, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. He looked at his hands. They were calloused, scarred, and strong. They had been trained to destroy, but now they had a new purpose. They were building a life. Jack turned back to the house, the wind whispering through the snow. He listened to it, and he smiled. "Clear skies," he whispered. "Clear skies."